Hello, this is the next chapter in The Quest of the White Merle by Lilian Gask. Chapter the 8th, The Bird with 100 Eyes. The stars of the Milky Way had tangled themselves into a web of light, and the sea was a bed of silver. Conrad flew on and on through the starlit air, keeping close to the shore. Then, as the web of light became a blur of rose colour, and the bed of silver a field of gold, he dropped his wings as he had seen the lark do, and slowly sank until his feet touched the ground. He was on the borders of a forest on the Malay Peninsula. Though the night had but just flown, the morning was hot and sultry, and a haze hung over the wide stream that hurried down from Mount Ophir to be lost in the forest depths. Delicate ferns trailed on its rocky banks, and curious pitcher plants, tinted with red and purple, climbed the low bushes or ran along the ground in a bewildering mass of leaves and stems. A green and brown cuckoo, with a face of red velvet and a bright green beak, flew out of the undergrowth and then retreated, and a crimson-breasted dove cooed softly to her mate. Sweet as her voice sounded, she was inquiring somewhat petulantly what these intruders were doing in her woods. Conrad looked round him curiously. The birds were as gaily attired as the finest tulips, and their cries were strange to him. A beautiful eastern trogon, whose plumage glittered as if he had rifled some treasure house of its gems, darted across his path, crying, "Crow, crow!" and a large green bird with a bristly bill and patches of blue and crimson on his neck uttered a short, sharp note of surprise at sight of the intruders. He had perched himself upon a twig and was waiting patiently for passing insects. When Conrad addressed him, he puffed himself out until he looked like a cone of feathers, with two inquiring eyes lurking in its depths. "What kind of creature may you be?" Conrad inquired, guessing that in another minute the bird would have asked this of him.
"I am a barbet,"
returned the feather cone, gradually subsiding into a bird again,
"and live on fruit and insects. A party of strange-looking animals who stood upright as you do, but had no wings, came here last year to shoot the Argus. I heard them say that I was a connecting link, whatever that might be, between the trogons and kingfishers. Perhaps you know, I don't."
"It means, I suppose, that you are rather like them both," said Conrad vaguely, looking at the shape of the barbet's head, which certainly somewhat resembled the kingfisher's. "I should be glad to hear about the Argus. Is he as wonderful as they say?"
"He has 100 eyes," declared the barbet solemnly, "and does not deign to mix with other birds. In the depths of the undergrowth, or perhaps near some dark ravine, he takes possession of a piece of ground and calls it his. At night he roosts in the trees quite near it, and he spends the day in keeping it clear of leaves and weeds. Sometimes, to tease him, the night wind strews it with stray feathers. This makes him angry, but he clears them all away."
"Where can I find him?" Conrad questioned. Those 100 eyes of his must be a great deal, he thought, and if the White Merle were here, he would surely know. The barbet had pounced on a shimmering butterfly and was on the lookout for another. While Conrad waited for him to speak, a little blue bird about the size of the robin, with a glimmer of red at her throat and breast, flew down and offered to be his guide.
"They call me the fairy bluebird,"
she twittered, her sweet little voice very pleasing to hear after the shrill cries of the trogons.
"My mate still seeks for food, but I am satisfied. If I can help you, it will give me pleasure."
Conrad lost no time in telling her of his quest, and she sympathised with him in the sweetest way.
"The birds about here are every colour but white," she added regretfully. but the Argus pheasant may know. We shall find him in his playground. I will take you now.
Darting lightly through a maze of bushes, she led them on through the forest, where the trees were as tall as giants, and yellow orchids hung from bough to bough. Conrad took a deep drink from one of the long blossoms, or pitchers, of the pitcher plant. It had caught and stored up the dew in the rain, and although quite warm, this was pleasant to the taste. He would have enjoyed it more if it had not been for the number of tiny insects floating about on it, though Gladheart tried to console him by saying that these were very nourishing. "And I see wild strawberries," he went on joyfully. The fairy bluebird perched beside them while Conrad made a meal of these. They did not taste half so sweet as wild strawberries should, but this, he found, was the case with most fruit in these luxuriant regions. The forest was very cool and dark. Many strange birds flashed out of the bushes and stared shyly at Conrad as he wandered on. They had never seen anything like him before, and were not quite sure how far he could be trusted. One bird, the size of a starling, had eyes of pure green flame. His plumage was a mixture of black and a deep, rich wine colour, barred with white. His large, broad bill was blue above and orange below.
"The Malays call him the rain-bird," said their little guide, "for when the skies grow dark he cries incessantly. His real name is the blue-billed gaper. I will tell you something curious about him," she went on, lowering her voice. "There is a sleep that comes to all birds from which we never wake. When we feel it approaching, we creep into some dark corner that we may be alone. But sometimes we have not time to hide ourselves away. And if this happens to the blue-billed gaper, you would see his bill turn black as a coal's wing."
She twittered on as though they had been old friends, and Conrad was full of wonder at all she told him. "What is that?" he asked her presently, as shrill cries of "How, how, how!" echoed and re-echoed from the distance above all other sounds.
"Something has startled the Argus pheasants," answered the fairy bluebird. "The males are giving the alarm, as they always do when they are disturbed."
A storm of cries in a different key came from another direction. "Howoo! Howoo!"
"Those are their mates who live alone, and are only allowed to pay them visits,"
remarked the fairy bluebird.
"Yes, it is a strange custom, and we should never put up with it ourselves. At nesting times the hen pheasants builds a rough shelter, and in the canebrakes or amongst the undergrowth without any help from her mate. She brings up her young as if they were fatherless, and she were a poor widow, poor thing."
"But what is the Argus doing?" asked Conrad, properly shocked.
"He's keeping his playground tidy," the fairy bluebird twittered. "What use is it to him? No one knows, though he is supposed to dance in it when by himself. He receives his wife there when he desires to see her, but that's not often, and soon gets tired."
A single cry of "How, how, how!" coming from close at hand told the fairy bluebird that he of the 100 eyes was near.
"Goodbye for the present," she chirped. "Perhaps we shall meet again. Go straight to your right down that path, and then sharp to your left. You'll meet the Argos then."
Conrad did as she told him, and came face to face with one of the most splendid birds he had ever beheld. Though his body was scarcely larger than that of an ordinary fowl, his magnificent plumage made him fully 5 feet in length. On Conrad's appearance, his tail was raised and his wings spread in a circular fan. He had just been engaged in charming his mate into forgetfulness of past coldness, and this display was all for her. As she reluctantly flew away, he lowered his feathers and with flashing eyes demanded the business of this uninvited guest.
"How dare you come here without an invitation? How, he cried.
Conrad did not answer. He was staring at his 100 eyes, which he found, after all, were but brilliant black rings surrounding the pure white spots on his wings and tail.
"How dare you come here? How, how?"
repeated the Argus impatiently, and Conrad hurriedly explained the reason of his journey. The Argus was still aggrieved, but his voice was milder.
"You should have asked me for an audience," he remarked. "I half expected you would come, for the night wind told me you were on your way. I do not happen to have met a White Merle myself, but then I am very exclusive. If you like to come with me, I am just going down to the stream for a drink. I will make you known to my family. Don't cross my playground, please. It was not meant for awkward feet like yours."
The playground was a level spot nearly 8 yards square in the midst of dense vegetation. The Argus had cleared away from it every scrap of grass and leaf, leaving the ground bare. Conrad obediently walked round this clearing. He was used by this time to references to his awkward feet, and followed the Argus meekly. The pheasant did not fly, for the length of his wings made this an effort, but his easy run covered the ground so quickly that Conrad could scarcely keep pace with it. He was glad to rest when they reached their destination. Some 20 or 30 Argus pheasants had flocked together by a tranquil stream to quench their thirst, while their mates, whether by design or accident, kept in the background. Conrad felt very sorry for them at first, but they did not seem unhappy, and presently returned to the forest without any attempt to join their lords. When the pheasants had dipped their beaks in the limpid water and splashed themselves until their 100 eyes were glistening with tears, they too dispersed. It would take them the rest of the day, they said, to put their playgrounds in order, and nothing must be allowed to interfere with this.
"It is very hard work,"
they told him solemnly, and Conrad wondered what the difference it would make if a few dead leaves were found there after all. He could learn nothing from them of the White Merle, but they all had a great deal to say about the atrocious behaviour of the fireback pheasant.
"He doesn't live here, I'm thankful to say,"
said the first Argus.
"but some cousins of mine on a strip of land between the sea and the mountains in Siam are greatly troubled with him. We are peaceful birds and hate to fight, and the fireback, knowing this, does his best to annoy us, making a horrid whirling sound and calling chukum chukum in the most insulting way. He drives my cousin out of his clearing and takes possession of it himself. When he has it, he does not know what to do with it. Why, who's been here?"
In the centre of his own playground, to which they had now returned, a stout handle of bamboo had been driven firmly into the ground. Attached to this, and forming part of it, was a narrow, whip-like strip of wood, shaved down to the thickness of a piece of paper. It looked innocent enough as it floated in the air, but the Argus gazed at it with horror.
"It was a thing like that," he said, "that slew my brother. The natives have tracked me to my home and seek to snare me also. How, how, how?"
"Tell me how," cried Conrad incredulously.
"Don't you see?"
wailed the pheasant.
"No Argus could allow a thing like that to spoil his playground, and when my poor brother found it so firmly fixed that he could not dig it out with his claws, he twisted the thin end of it round and round his neck, and by taking hold of the bamboo close to the ground and springing backwards, tried to pull it up. The sharp, cruel edges of the glistening strip he had wound about him tore through his delicate flesh and cut his head off. Alas, alas, his ending would be mine had I not watched him in his death struggle. Now I must find another home. But how?
Every Argus in the immediate neighbourhood answered his dismal cry, and Conrad felt that in some vague way they were blaming him for the Malays' discovery of their comrade's playground. They received his farewells with marked coolness, and each Argus that he chanced to meet turned his head aside. Before long, Conrad came across another native trap. This was intended for bigger game than an Argus pheasant. He was sauntering through the forest in what he imagined to be the direction of the open country when he stumbled into a deep pit. Its surface was covered with ferns and grass, so that no one could tell the soil had been disturbed. But for his wings, which lifted him on to solid ground again, he would have fallen to the bottom.
Here there was a tiger pit,
chirped the fairy bluebird who had been hovering near.
The natives dig them early in the day, and when the shadows gather, and savage creatures leave the depths of the jungle to seek their prey, the tigers crash through the ferns and grasses into these deep holes and break their legs. That is the end of them, for the natives kill them when they come next morning, and then steal their skins.
Conrad did not feel inclined to linger in the forest after this adventure. Rising high above the trees, he flew straight over a narrow strip of sea to an island that a seagull told him was called Sumatra. Passing round a big town built on the curve of a river, he alighted on a little hill sheltered by some fine trees. The glare of the sunshine had been very great, and he was glad to rest a while in their wide branches. He had scarcely settled himself in the cup-like hollow of a deep bough when the leaves parted and a number of squirrels peeped down at him inquiringly. Their beautifully ringed tails were held erect, and their bright eyes were full of confidence. One small fellow tucked his soft little nose in Conrad's hand and seemed surprised at finding nothing there. With a call to his companions, he scampered off, and a small green bird with a yellow beak left her nest on the topmost bough to pay the stranger a visit. She was careful, however, not to come within Conrad's reach, for she could not make him out.
"The Malays are always feeding their squirrels," she complained, "and the mischievous little creatures think they can do just as they like. I missed 2 eggs this season, and I know who to thank for it. Are you a boy or a bird? This is supposed to be a sacred hill. I shouldn't advise you to let the natives find you here."
From the little he had seen of the dark-skinned Malays, Conrad thought they looked kind and gentle. Still, as Gladheart reminded him, you could never tell what human beings might take it into their heads to do, and it was better to be on the safe side. So he shook his wings and started off again, flying on and on until he reached a vast forest in the interior of the island. Troops of monkeys with very long tails swung themselves from branch to branch in its green recesses, and the howl, howl, howl of the Argus pheasants mingled with their loud chattering. As Conrad threw himself on the ground at the foot of a tall tree, he heard another cry that was unfamiliar to him. It was as loud as the booming of the bittern, but more like a deep bell. Coo, 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 cooah, cooah. It rang, and high above his head, some 50 feet or so from the ground, he saw a most curious bird. Attached to his great beak was a strange helmet of horn, and as Conrad watched him, he sprang from bough to bough in a series of awkward leaps.
"That must be the hornbill that the fairy bird told us to be on the watch for," chirped Gladheart. "There are cousins of his in all Asia who eat small birds," she said, "but hornbills in these islands live on fruit only. Wouldn't you like to talk to him? He's quite a famous bird, for he shuts up his wife in a hollow tree when she's going to lay an egg. Instead of building a nest for her, she has to stay there until her young one is strong enough to fly."
"What a shame!" cried Conrad hotly, and the hornbill, who seemed to have remarkably sharp ears, flopped down from the tree to rebuke him for judging too hastily.
"When you know the truth," he remarked loftily, "you will apologize. If my mate were here just now, she would be the first to exclaim at your injustice, For if it were not for her imprisoned in the tree, she would be at the mercy of her enemies while she is molting. She herself helps me to block up the hole in the tree that we have chosen with gum like saliva that hardens when exposed to the air, and she goes inside willingly when the time comes.
But why do you shut her up? Conrad persisted. He was quite willing to believe that what the hornbill told him, but it did seem hard that the mother bird should be hidden away from fresh air and the sunshine.
Because, said the hornbill quietly, with a reproachful glance, she molts completely, poor thing, when she has hatched her egg, and until her feathers have grown again, she could neither defend herself nor her young one from the attacks of skunks and tree lizards. The paradoxure, too, the deadly little animal, loves the taste of our flesh. Why should she be needlessly exposed to danger when this can be avoided by so simple a plan as ours?
But doesn't she get most dreadfully hungry? Asked Conrad, only half convinced. The hornbill clashed his heavy beak and looked more reproachful than ever.
She would starve if it were not for me, he said. But where do you find a bird that would leave his mate to suffer and die? I feed her through a hole in her prison walls with pellets of finely chopped leaves and fruit in bags of skin which is the lining of my own gizzard. Attending to her wants keeps me busy from morning till night, for her appetite is enormous, and when at last I set her free, I am worn to a shadow. She and our little one are plump and round, so I do not mind.
What would happen if you were to die?
Other hornbills would feed her, said the strange bird solemnly. A mother in her need is never forgotten. Last season I myself helped to nourish the widow of a hornbill who had been slain by a curious thing that spat out fire. It was carried by a man whose face was as pale as yours. I hope for your sake, as well as ours, that you are not his kindred.
The return of a troop of chattering monkeys cut short his speech, and Conrad was not sorry to be saved from the necessity of replying.